most important journey you will take in your life is the one of self-discovery and transformation. Welcome to Elevate and Liberate podcast. I'm Ashlee Rose, and each week we'll dive deep into transforming our inner world in order to create the life and love you crave. Who are you really? And what's actually possible for you this lifetime? Subscribe now and let's elevate and liberate love, life, and self. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Elevate and Liberate podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode on communication. We're going to dive into what true communication actually is. We're going to debunk the myths of communication, and I'm going to give you then pragmatic and practical ways and tools that you can actually implement now to perhaps create greater ease when communicating with others. So it is only 4 weeks until my partner and I jet set off on our basically 6-month adventure around the world, which I'm so excited about. So if you don't know already, I am making my way to Toronto in 4 weeks' time to facilitate some classes. And then I will be in Prague to facilitate a Talk to the Aunties beginning class with my friend Marketa, which you can attend live with us there. And then I'll be in London to facilitate another Talk to the Aunties beginning class, which you can actually attend live or online. I am so thrilled to announce that I have been given permission, well, all of us facilitators that have been facilitating Talk to the Entities for more than 4 years have now been given permission to facilitate the beginning classes online. So I'll put more information via the show notes below if you're interested in attending one of those classes with me and to find out more information about it. But let's dive into today's episode about communication. So I have facilitated a number of different classes and calls on communication beyond the words. And so I have facilitated a number of different workshops, which I've called Communication Beyond the Words, in my recent Unfuck Yourself relationship programs, which everybody has loved. So I thought I'd do an episode about it and just speak a little bit more to this topic, because when Googling the number one problem in relationship, it's always communication that comes up. But what if true communication is actually not what you think it is? And it's interesting starting this new relationship that I'm in, because recently I've had a number of people ask me, if we fought, if we've argued, which is kind of a weird question. And it's interesting because we actually really haven't. And people are so confused about that. And what I've noticed is communication between us is so easy because I know what he's thinking. I know what part of everything that comes up is mine, and I know what part is his. And often we actually don't require to even talk about things because of that. And don't get me wrong, we still talk a lot, but from a space that actually creates greater for both of us and allows us to be closer as a result of that communication. But often in this reality, communication can often lead to more confrontation, more conflict, and people are so confused about how to even do it. But the thing that most people don't get is true communication actually exists beyond the words. True communication is actually about being, knowing, perceiving, and receiving. Now, what does that even mean? So an example of this is you can have communication without words. In fact, true communication is beyond words. Have you ever had a moment with an animal or maybe your pet and you just knew what they wanted? You knew they wanted to go to the toilet, or they wanted to go outside, or they wanted food. That's true communication, because what's actually occurring is without words, you're perceiving their world, you're then receiving the information, and then what comes out of your mouth actually is the knowing. And all of this exists beyond your mind without having to think about it. So I just want you to first start to recognize that communication actually occurs beyond words. We all have this telepathic communication. We all have this capacity with awareness where you can actually know what's going on for someone without having to have a conversation about it. But in this reality, what we call communication is actually talking. And in order to talk to someone, you often have to engage your mind and think. And then what we do when we do that is we actually cut off this space of telepathic communication that's occurring between everything and every molecule around you. So another example of that is if you have a business per se, and you were willing to have true communication with it, then what would happen is you would actually hear the whispers of your business, just like you heard the whispers of your pet, of the animal, and you would know what's required, meaning when to do a class, where to do the class, how much to make the class. But what we do in this reality is we make ourselves less than and think. And when you have to make yourself less than and think, then you have to figure it all out. And then you have to go to strategy, and then you have to go to formula, and then you have to weigh up the pros and cons before you actually make a choice about anything. So that's the difference between true communication and actually talking. So I wanted you guys to get that first, because what we don't recognize is we are constantly communicating with everything around us. Everything is constantly communicating with us. Plants, animals, our business, our body, our bank account, because every single element is actually an entity. And every single entity is actually an energy that's defined that we can constantly be hearing. So that's kind of a side note of where I wanted to go with this conversation about communication, more so with people. But just get that. What if you were always communicating with everything? And what if everything is communicating with you? And this is then what creates the confusion when it comes to talking, because we are already having elements of communication with everything. So some key points, I guess, when it comes to communication is the first one, like I've just mentioned, is energy is actually your first language. How many times has someone said something to you that didn't actually match the energy of what they were truly saying? How many times have you actually been frustrated because what you were trying to communicate with someone was not received and not acknowledged? We have this telepathic communication available to us, but we don't use it because we're not empowered to know what that even is. And the thing is, language is actually a lessening of our capacity to perceive energy. You cut off your capacity of perception in order to hear words. But words are actually a major limitation of perception. So you do get that. Like, so often we cut off our telepathic communication, what we're actually perceiving beyond the words, in order to hear people's words, in order to believe the words that are coming out of their mouth as true. And what we don't realize is so often all of us are constantly lying to ourselves. So often what we think is actually not true. And particularly if we're in a relationship and we're in some kind of conflict or something's triggering us, what we think is actually triggering us is not often the thing that is actually what's real. It's often what's actually underneath that, which is the telepathic communication that we're having, that is actually what's creating this conflict in the first place. So if we were all communicating from a telepathic point of view, what would occur is we would have the whole picture. And I'm trying to think of an example to give you with this, even with my partner and I. But sometimes, if not like a lot of the time for all of us, like we're triggered by certain things. So say, for example, that my partner or your partner or a friend wanted to spend more time with their friends, right? And they had planned to hang out with their friends or prioritize their friends like quite a lot in the last week. And then what comes up for you is it feels like you don't want to spend time with me. And if we're not willing to have the telepathic communication and acknowledge what's beyond the words, then the conflict, like we try and talk about it, but sometimes you can't get very far because from your point of view, you're saying, well, I don't feel like you want to talk, like, I don't feel like you want to hang out with me very much. I feel like you're prioritizing your friends. And then from the other person's point of view, it literally may not be the case. They might not even be aware of that. And it's not actually true. But just over the last week, their friends have had more stuff on and they've invited them to more things than usual. So that's when we can get into this conflict because we're not willing to actually look at the whole picture. If we were willing to have this telepathic communication and actually look at the whole picture, then I could be aware that, okay, it's not that it seems like you're spending more time with your friends or prioritizing your friends. That's actually bringing up all my stuff. It's actually bringing up that I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel like I'm ever going to be prioritized, or I'm always going to be rejected and abandoned. So do you see if we go into any situation just with the words, we kind of miss all of this energy and what's actually going on underneath everything. So if we were willing to actually be with that energy and perceive and receive other information that's beyond what we think is going on, then there'd be actually no mistake ever about what's going on between you and another. And you'd both get everything the other person was actually talking about. But what we do in this reality is we try and make our ears, our eyes, our nose, and our throat the source of communication. But in order to have ease with communicating with others, you have to start claiming what you know, what you're aware of. And like I said, not take everything that comes out of someone else's mouth on face value. So that's number one. Energy is your first language. It's not words. So number two is when we communicate with others, we often communicate and deliver a whole background of information at the same time. And you've got to actually have that awareness of the energy of the background information to have true communication and to have true receiving of another. So in the example I gave before about my partner prioritizing his friends, and I'm just using that as an example that actually hasn't occurred, but I couldn't think of anything else in the moment. So that example of my partner prioritizing his friends and then me believing that he doesn't love me anymore or he's not prioritizing me, the background information coming with often that conversation would be that I feel abandoned or that I feel rejected or I don't feel good enough or I don't feel like I'm ever prioritized, right? So I've got to be aware of that background information in order to actually truly create something greater with a conversation that's about to occur. Otherwise, a lot of the time, it's just this total space of confrontation. And here's my point of view, and here's your point of view. And it never really works out because someone always has to leave that conversation right, and someone always has to leave that conversation wrong. So if you leave a conversation with someone confused, then what's often occurred is you've actually been aware of an energy or the background information coming with their words, which actually didn't match what they were saying. And when you communicate with all this background information without being aware of it, you actually deliver from a space of rightness or from a space of separation rather than with total clarity. And if you can be aware of this background information, actually having conversation can be so much easier and create so much greater. So number three is when we communicate, we often have no awareness of your universe or another person's universe. And each party that's having this conversation has a whole universe that they think the other party should have the awareness of from their perspective, but they don't have that awareness. And often both people think that the other person should know what they're thinking because they don't feel any difference between them and the other person. And the closer you are with someone, the more likely this is to occur. So that was number three. We have no awareness of someone else's universe, but also believe that they should have total awareness of ours. So number four is that, and I've already kind of mentioned this, is that communication is often about a point of view, right? So most people's idea of communication is to impel their point of view onto another. It's the idea that I deliver my point of view, that you deliver your point of view, and I'm right and you're wrong. And as you guys are probably aware, this never creates anything greater. So if you agree to that, you've had communication, but if you disagree with them, then you're in this space of conflict and confrontation. So number five is that most people don't realize that people talk at you, often never with you. 90% of people in the world will talk at you or talk to you and never with you. When somebody is actually talking to you or at you, you have no communication. You have this one-way street or one-way drift that takes you out to sea. But they're creating this current of what they want you to listen to and what they want you to do. Oftentimes people talk at you as a way of controlling you. And I didn't realize this until I realized this, is that so much of conversation between others is just one person talking at the other person in order to control them. But if you're actually talking with someone, then they never want to control you. So they never want to control you when they talk with you and actually include you. Sit with that for a moment and think of those times that you've tried to talk to someone, and it might be a significant other or a partner or a good friend or family member. and it's turned into this big argument, or it's turned into this big space of conflict. Were you actually trying to just get your point of view across in order to control them and in order to be right? Because if you want to be right, you want to control someone. You won't actually include them in that conversation. You won't actually include their perspective or their point of view or what's actually going on for them. So sometimes that can be confronting, realizing that, oh, wow, if I'm talking at someone, I'm doing that to control them. Or if someone's talking at me, they're doing it to control me. But it can be also very liberating and freeing when you actually recognize that. So the last point that I've written down to kind of debunk the myths of communication, or actually get you to recognize what's going on when you're so confused having a conversation with someone, or how it seems to blow up very quickly, is that when miscommunication occurs, it's actually just showing you where there is no receiving. So a giant source for what ends up becoming miscommunication actually occurs when someone doesn't receive what you're trying to say to them. And when someone doesn't receive what you're trying to say to them, or vice versa, then oftentimes we reject ourselves and make ourselves wrong. But then what happens is you reject everybody else when you don't see it the way that they see it, which creates this conflict. And oftentimes, if somebody doesn't receive what you said exactly the way you meant it, you feel like you've personally been attacked. So that's why I said at the very start of this conversation that true communication is really from a space of being, knowing, perceiving, and receiving. Because all miscommunication is a lack of receiving and a lack of willingness to receive someone else's point of view or to receive what's going on for another. So how do you actually begin to create more ease with communication then? And obviously some of those points that I mentioned above might be already like, you might be having light bulbs kind of go off and start to recognize like what you've been choosing that may have been creating more conflict than is actually required. So the first point that I've written down to create more ease when communicating with someone is to ask questions of yourself first and foremost. So when you actually start functioning from the energy rather than the words, but when you start actually claiming that, okay, energy is my first language, I'm aware of a whole background information that's occurring when anybody is talking to me. Start asking, okay, what am I missing here? And this is more so if you're confused when you're having a conversation with someone else. What am I missing here? And what do I need to know here that will make this easier for me? And what are they not saying that is actually true? So if you start to ask these questions of yourself, you start to actually then function from true communication, because you start to allow yourself to become aware of where they're actually functioning from beyond the words. And this creates so much ease in relationship. This has created so much ease in my current relationship, being aware of this, because he might come to me and say something to me. And what I can do is I can sit back and tap into the energy of it and go, okay, where is he actually coming from? Or what do I need to know here that will make this easier for me? And then true communication can occur because I'm starting to receive where he's actually coming from, that he's not even aware of that he's coming from. And again, this takes practice. Like, this is not something that you might have the awareness of straight away, but if you start asking these questions, you start opening yourself up to infinite perceiving and infinite receiving of information that your mind can't comprehend. And then your infinite knowing of what is actually going on for that person underneath the words. So number one is to ask yourself questions. Number two is then to ask them questions. So for example, hey, what's going on for you right now? Or how are you doing? Or how are you really? Because when you actually ask someone questions, the person begins to realize that you actually see them. And then what you say to them doesn't mean that you're shoving them away or rejecting them. It means that you're actually interested. So in a way, when you ask questions, you become interested in someone and you start talking with them, not to them. So what happens is it creates this space of communion and receiving where it's less likely for miscommunication to occur. And then what occurs is when they feel like they want to say something to you, they know that you're hearing them because you have all the pieces behind the scenes that they actually never communicate. So they start feeling a lot safer in your presence and safer to open up and safer to actually say what's going on for them when they know that you're on board as well. And when they know that you're desiring to speak with them and kind of come at this from a level playing field. So ask them questions. Hey, this is what's going on for me. I absolutely know that this may not be true, but this is what's being triggered. Or if you're not even sure what's being triggered, you can say, hey, this is what's going on for me right now. I'm not really sure where it's coming from, but also I know that you're not wrong and I'm not going to try and be right in this. But I'd love to really get curious and just see what's going on for you here as well. And that then starts to open up this dialogue of open communication where you start really functioning from this space of true communication that can create greater for all. So number 3 is to listen and stop talking. Because when you start listening to someone and don't have to get your point of view across and don't have to tell them how wrong they are, then you'll start getting all of the information and enough information to be aware of where they're actually functioning from. And sometimes being silent actually creates more than any other choice in that moment. And like I kind of said above in the point above, when you actually start listening, people feel like they're being received and heard and seen. And that changes everything because that allows someone to melt into that space of true vulnerability. So number 4 is to actually be vulnerable. And being vulnerable really means that you don't have to be right or make the other person wrong, but you're also not making yourself wrong. And you're curious to hear what's going on for them too. That is that space of vulnerability where there's no walls, there's no barriers, there's no rightness, there's no wrongness, but there is this space of true curiosity. Because when you're willing to be vulnerable with someone, it creates this space that allows something so much greater to occur. And vulnerability is the beginning of true intimacy and true communion with another. Vulnerability doesn't mean that you have to get it right or you have to be fully aware of where your stuff is coming from or take full responsibility and come at the person with, okay, this is what's going on, but this is what it means. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability is, in the example I said before, of literally just saying to someone, hey, this is what's going on for me. I have no idea where it's coming from. I know it might sound crazy. I don't desire to make you wrong in any of this, but can we have a conversation about it, please? That is true vulnerability. And all you need to do is lower your walls and barriers and breathe in that moment. And sometimes say to yourself, okay, there is no right or wrong. I'm not right and I'm not wrong, and they're not right and they're not wrong. And then have a conversation from that space. And so then the last point that I've mentioned in this episode to create more ease with communication with everything and everyone is to start being curious. We all have shit going on. We all have lots of background information that we deliver when we communicate without realizing. Be curious as to what's going on for someone else. None of us are perfect. None of us have it right, but none of us are wrong either. So what if you could actually, instead of trying to decide that that other person is malicious or that other person is out to get you or that other person doesn't like you or that other person isn't making you a priority or that other person doesn't desire to be with you anymore or friends with you anymore, what if instead of allowing your mind to take over and just run the show, you actually stopped and you got present and you were like, is that actually true? And can I be 100% sure that that is true? And oftentimes you'll find that all of that is a no. So if you get curious, again, by asking those open-ended questions, then you'll start to allow yourself to naturally open up to this space of greater vulnerability and greater receiving as well, which is really the key to having true communication and actually then having this joy of communication with someone where it's actually exciting to have a conversation because you always know that something greater is going to occur because of it. And that's what my partner and I have. I actually am excited to have conversations with him about anything because I'm so curious as to what's going on for him or where he's functioning from. And I also know that he never tries to make me wrong. I mean, we have our moments, but ultimately I know when he's being him that he's not actually trying to make me wrong. And he creates this safe space where we can actually have this true communication where everything gets greater because of it. So they're my tips and tricks to create greater ease with communicating in the short time that we have on this podcast episode. I hope that contributes. And like I said, this is a very, very big topic. And really, in order to start having true communication with someone, like I said, you've really got to start functioning from that space of being, of knowing, of perceiving, of receiving, of really trusting you, of knowing that you know, and also having that level of vulnerability with you to actually start to acknowledge that, hey, I do have stuff going on too. And what I may think is going on in my head may not actually be the case at all. So it really takes this level of vulnerability from both parties to actually really have this space of true communication. And it's not something that we're learned growing up. We're not taught how to be, how to know, how to perceive, how to receive. In fact, we're taught the opposite. We're taught to be right. You know, most of us feel like we're wrong. We're taught how to judge because growing up, everything is right, wrong, good, bad. And all that does is literally eliminates this capacity we have to be, to know, to perceive and receive all this information that's going on behind the scenes. And that's something as well, if you're curious to start actually accessing more of that being, knowing, perceiving, and true receiving, that's what you learn in the Talk to the Auntie classes. And most people don't recognize that, but that's what attending a Talk to the Aunties class has actually gifted me. It's gifted me the ability to start functioning from the true space of me, my natural state of being, where we have these capacities to hear everything, to hear the whispers. So I invite you, if you want more information, to go again to the show notes below and check out the classes that I have coming up. Like I said, my class in August in London will be online via Zoom around the world as well. And my friend Marketa and I also have a 3-part series coming up called Listening to the Whispers of Creation. And again, this really is an extension of true communication as well, because we're going to teach you how to start to listen to those whispers, how to start to listen to that information that is constantly whispering to us, that the universe is constantly delivering. When we actually ask for something to show up or ask the universe for something, it's our job to ask and then follow the breadcrumbs. But most people don't even know what the breadcrumbs are, or how to know if they're breadcrumbs, or how to know if the breadcrumbs are the mind or actually the universe, you know, offering something greater to us if we were willing to follow those. So really, listening to the whispers of creation is all about how do you follow the breadcrumbs and how do you start accessing that space that's available, that knowing that's available, that perceiving that's available beyond the mind. And all of this is going to contribute to actually having greater ease in having conversations and communicating with anyone. And that's what I've realized. Like, until this current relationship that I'm in, I didn't realize how much Talk to the Entities actually, and the tools that you learn in that actually taught me how to have ease with communicating with my partner and actually knowing what was going on for me and knowing what was going on for him and coming from a space of vulnerability. So I invite you guys to any of those classes that are coming up. I'll put the link in the show notes below. As I mentioned, I hope this episode has been a contribution. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me, message me on any of the platforms. There's so many platforms these days, or email me at info@ashlee-rose.com. And please, if you are enjoying these episodes or love this podcast, I would love for you to give me a 5-star review on Apple iTunes or wherever you listen to this, and even write a review if you desire, or subscribe on YouTube, or send this episode to someone you know that may be looking for this as well. All of it contributes to the world becoming greater and all of us having so much more ease functioning as a human in this body. And we're so much more than that as well. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I hope you had a wonderful weekend as well. And I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review and share it with someone you know. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of upcoming episodes. You can find more about me at ashlee-rose.com. And remember, creating the life and love you crave is absolutely possible and available to each and every one of you.